This conference will now be recorded.
Okay then everyone. Hi, thanks for attending. Thanks for coming along to this chat tonight. So just a little bit about me. My name is Rosie and I work for Yorkshire Mesmac. I'm the training and communications coordinator up here. You are all muted, which is great, so I can take that slide off. So tonight we're going to be talking about self-care and avoiding burnout. So I don't necessarily there's some aspects of this that I'm sure that most people are aware of what self-care is and what burnout is and how we can avoid that. But what I'm really hoping to do is to re-motivate people and to give people some new ways of thinking about how avoiding burnout works for each individual person, because it doesn't always work the same for everyone, especially across organisations and sectors and groups like the ones that we work for and that we run. So hopefully you'll have some tools and resources to facilitate groups or to deliver the work that you deliver, if it's on a project or in whatever capacity, without burning out. And almost more importantly, to recognise when burnout may occur and how you can work to prevent that burnout before it's actually happened. I'm sure we all know it's easier to prevent something rather than deal with something once it's happened. And a big thing for me tonight that I will keep talking about again and again and again is understanding the importance of communication, especially in relation to self-care and to avoiding burnout. So hopefully we'll understand the importance of communication within sort of a supervisory role and understand how supervision can have a huge impact on our workload, and to feel confident in being able to talk to someone about your burnout. Now, I'm not sure about everybody else on the session here, but anecdotally, I definitely know a lot of people that can talk to other people about their burnout and about their self-care, and we'll be able to. Oh, there's just a couple more people that have arrived. Brilliant. Hello there. Um, you might feel really confident in talking to other people about how to avoid their burnout and what self-care looks like for other people, but not necessarily always so confident at talking about it when it comes to ourselves. And so hopefully with going through this presentation, we might all feel a little bit more confident to say, actually, yeah, it is important for me to communicate my feelings and my needs around my workload and the work that I'm doing. So hopefully we'll hit all those outcomes in the next hour. And just to clarify again, there will be a question and answer time at the end of the presentation. If some people want to pop in some things in the chat during it, then you absolutely can do, but I might just come back to those questions at the end for everyone to answer them all together, depending on how we're doing for time. But I know that if it was me, I'd sometimes forget my question by the end of the session, so I don't mind people writing it down. Okie dokie then. So looking at burnout. So what is burnout? We all know, I think, what sort of burnout looks like and how we might experience burnout. And if you do a good old Google of burnout, this is what Google tells you that burnout is. So it's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So I've put excessive and prolonged stress in bold there, because I think it's really important that we recognise that burnout does happen after an excessive amount of stress or stress that's been going on for a long time. And I think sometimes we think that we might burn out too easily, and burnout doesn't happen unless we've been dealing with something for a long time or in excessive amounts. And it's important for us all to recognise that. And it occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. And that last bit there, unable to meet constant demands, is something that I will talk about a little bit later in terms of the demands that we have placed upon us and how we respond to those, and how sometimes our responses to those can lead to burnout. And hopefully, if we can recognise that, we'll be able to avoid some of that burnout that we often experience. And I think that constant demands can come in any shape or form. It doesn't need to be big demands. Often people think, oh, it's not that big, this piece of work that I've been asked to do actually isn't such a big piece of work. Why am I feeling so drained by this? But if it's little and constant and those demands are constantly being put upon you, doesn't matter how small they are, it goes back to that prolonged stress. And if it's been going on for a long time, it's just allowing ourselves to recognise doesn't need to be a big amount of stress that causes burnout, and be a bit kinder to ourselves with recognising that. So I think it's really important to recognise what burnout looks like for each individual person, because it is different to everyone. Burnout doesn't look the same in each individual person at all, and that's fine as long as we recognise what it looks like for us. So for me, I can definitely tell you that my burnout looks like frustration and being frustrated at sometimes the smallest and tiniest things that sometimes I think, oh, that wouldn't usually have annoyed me in any other situation, but that's flipped my lid and it's annoyed me, and I get quite frustrated, whether that's at myself, whether it's at something outside of my control, or sometimes whether it's at the people around me. So I know that if I start to feel a bit frustrated, then that's a bit of a sign of burnout for me. And so I now know, I've now taught myself to recognise that, and to then do the things that I need to do to recuperate and be able to function again, not at burnout level. Exhaustion is something that I'm sure you all hear a lot, and I definitely hear a lot of, in terms of burnout, people feeling absolutely exhausted. And that the slide previously talks about mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, and physical exhaustion. And so it can be exhaustion in many different forms. But some of the things I hear a lot when you say, "Oh, how are you doing? How's things? I've not seen you for a while." Somebody's automatic response is, "Oh, I'm knackered. Oh, I'm really tired. Oh, I couldn't get up this morning, or I've slept for hours and I'm still tired." And when that's someone's sort of first response to how you're doing, that usually is a bit of a red flag for me in terms of that person might be experiencing burnout. And I'm sure that we can all recognise that in ourselves and in others. And I think sometimes it's about recognising how far you push yourself when you're feeling exhausted. Feeling tired at the end of the day might be quite different to being absolutely exhausted when you wake up first thing in the morning. And so it's about recognising that. And isolation I've put here, that these aren't the only three versions of burnout. Obviously, there are many, many others, but I think these are the three that I often see the most. And I think isolation is a really important one for us to talk about, in terms of actually what is healthy and what is unhealthy when it comes to keeping to ourselves and enjoying our own company. Now, obviously, being on our own isn't innately a bad thing, and a lot of us will need our own time away from people in order to recuperate and to not feel burnt out. So again, it's recognising that balance between what is it that is healthy for us, and when are we isolating ourselves to a point where we are really struggling to communicate our needs clearly with others. And if we're alone and we find it hard to see other people, it can sometimes be hard to get that motivation and that support that you need to be able to recuperate and recover and get back to what it is that you're needing to do. And I think that's something that sort of concerns me quite a lot, that people aren't being able to be surrounded by that motivation when we're isolating ourselves, when we're so burnt out. So I think with all of this, it's a fine balancing game about figuring out what is within our normal realm, and actually what is a little bit unhealthy, and how we can recognise that within ourselves. Now, I'm sure plenty of you listening tonight will have your own different forms of burnout, and I think I'd like you to take a bit of time, either during this session or after this session, to think, what is it that I experience when I know that I've been pushed to my limits, and work projects are going on and deadlines are going on and there's targets to meet, what does my behaviour look like when I'm starting to burn out, or indeed when I have burnt out and there's nothing left to give? I think it's important that we can all recognise that in ourselves, because if we can't recognise it in ourselves, it's really hard to prevent it happening in the future, and it's really hard to do anything about it when that sort of time occurs. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Computer just frozen there, sorry. So, burnout is more likely to happen, as said in that initial slide, when we are experiencing excessive or prolonged stress. But also I think there's some instances here that we might all recognise will lead to burnout within ourselves. So when your work doesn't feel good enough, so when you feel like the work that you're doing might be all right, but it doesn't quite meet the needs of the people that we need them to. So we feel like that the work is okay, but we should be able to do more. It's not good enough. It's not doing the job it needs to do, so we need to do extra work. And so if we're feeling like that, we're likely to push ourselves further and further to try and get that good enough feeling. And sometimes we don't always know what good enough feels like. All we know is what doesn't feel like good enough. And so I think it kind of makes sense that if you're working yourself to an unattainable goal that you haven't even fixed, then it's much more likely that we're going to burn out. You feel inadequate or wrong bullet point there. You feel underappreciated for your efforts. Now, I think this is a really tricky one to talk about, and I think I know a lot of people that struggle with talking about this because it's almost asking for praise, which is something that a lot of people really struggle with, accepting that it's okay to sometimes need appreciation and to need a little bit of praise or recognition for the work that you have done. It is human and it is natural to enjoy it and to feel better when someone recognises a good piece of work that you've done. And if you're constantly working to a point where, if you go to the previous bullet point, your work doesn't feel good enough, does it not feel good enough because you haven't had the appreciation for the work that you have done? So if you're constantly slogging your guts out and constantly feeling like that's being missed by the people that you are delivering this work for, then you're maybe more likely again to work harder to try and get some of that appreciation from whoever it is around you that you feel like you need or want that appreciation from. So again, their burnout is more likely to occur. And all of these things don't just occur in silos, they occur all together. But I think it's important to sort of break down the elements of what leads to burnout rather than just saying, oh, it's a lot of excessive stress. Actually, can we pinpoint the things that are important to us that might improve our feeling around our work? The next one, so do you feel inadequate or incompetent? Do you feel like actually the work that you're doing isn't even doing the work that it should be? So it's slightly different from that one above in terms of the work feeling good enough, and it's you not feeling good enough and thinking actually somebody else could do this work better than me. I'm not doing the best job for this and somebody else should be doing it. And if you're putting yourself down and if you're feeling like other people could do work better than you, it's not good for anyone's mental health in terms of how we're speaking to ourselves in those situations. And if we are downplaying the work that we're doing and downplaying the abilities that we think we have, we're going to feel inadequate, and we're not going to feel able to fulfill the work that we want to fill in an enjoyable way. It won't feel enjoyable. It will feel much more like hard work without any appreciation from yourself or others around you. And not finally on this slide, but one of the other occurrences, and I've touched on this slightly, is when you have unreasonable demands placed on you. Now that might be that the demands are being placed on you by others, or it might well be that those demands are being placed on you by yourself. And often we are our own harshest critic and give ourselves the harshest deadlines and the harshest targets in order to feel like the work we're doing is good enough and is worthy. And feeling like these demands are being placed upon you, that are unreasonable and unattainable and unachievable will often lead to someone stressing and panicking and either doing so much work, more work than is necessary, or shutting down completely and not being able to meet any demands or any needs or any targets, which then you get yourself into a cycle of, well, I'm not good enough because I haven't been able to reach the demands that have been placed upon me. So it can really go from one end of the scale to the other, but neither of those places are healthy places to be in terms of these demands that we feel are upon us. So that's those. Now I've briefly gone through what I mean by each of those bullet points, but you're going to be able to have these slides available to you. So I want you to have those bullet points down. And here's just some non-exhaustive ideas around how you might be able to combat those feelings that you might have around each of those different areas that may lead to burnout. Now, I said at the start that I would talk again and again and again about communication, and I wasn't exaggerating. I do think it's really important. So if we are feeling, if at any point, whatever piece of work we do, whether it's a voluntary piece of work, whether it's a piece of work that's paid work, whatever that might look like for you, if you're feeling that your work isn't feeling good enough, talk to someone about it. Talking to someone about it will lift some of those worries that you've had. If you talk to a peer, talk to a friend, talk to someone in a similar situation to yourself, and tell them your concerns, and often they'll be able to guide you through a bit of a conversation around what it is that doesn't feel good enough, and you'll be able to have a bit more of a balanced view. As I said, we're our own worst critic, and if we're talking to someone else, they're often likely to be much less critical about ourselves and our work, and it will often give you a much more balanced view of the work that you've been doing probably is good enough in most instances. But it's also worth not just listening to your friends and your peers and listening to what they think of your work. Evaluate the work. If you're working with other people, whether if that's in a team on a project that you're working on, or other teammates that may be working on different projects but have got similar outcomes, can you evaluate that work in any way, shape or form? And can you do that in a constructive work way, so you still feel like you're getting that feedback, you're getting that evaluation, but you're not just getting it from a friend that says, oh no, that works really good. You're actually getting something constructive, and that can often feel really useful for people to go, oh okay, I didn't feel like that was so good, but upon reflection, upon evaluation, actually this work has done the work that it needed to do. And that kind of links in with this one. Ask for feedback. If you're designing a poster, if you're designing a survey, a training course, whatever it is that you're doing that you're not sure is good enough, ask for some feedback. Ask for feedback when you've created the work, when you've delivered the work. Ask for feedback at as many stages of your project or piece of work that you need to or want to make sure that you've got the confidence that other people think it's good enough as well. And I think asking for feedback is something that we're not always very good at, and I think it can really help us, even if the feedback is, actually, I would have done this way potentially, or this would work for me. You can still use that in a really positive way for yourself and go, okay, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I'll think about how I might work like that and if that does work for me or not. Assessing what your work needs are. If your work doesn't feel good enough, have you taken a step back to go, okay, what is it that this work needs to achieve? And shall I sit back and actually assess what needs to be done here? And just taking that step away and step back from the work to look at the wider picture. Often we become so focused on those minor, tiny, small details that we forget that bigger picture. So can we take a step back and assess those wider needs? And also know what your skills are. I think there's a really important thing here in terms of how we talk to ourselves. And often we'll say something like, I haven't got the skills to do that. That isn't my strength. That isn't my skill set. And we'll often talk about ourselves in quite negative ways and things that we can't do. actually I would ask you to switch that, flip that around and say, okay, do you know what I'm really good at doing? I'm really good at creating a space for people that feels really comfortable, or I'm really good at creating a good report or an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it is that it is that work is within your work project. Talk about the skills that you have got, and utilize those skills and be proud of those skills, and work to your skills. You know, if you haven't got a specific skill set, can you do your work towards the skill set that you have got that you are proud of? Obviously, depending on the kind of work that we do and what capacity we're all here in, the workload may or may not be able to be shared. But is it, you know, often we tell ourselves, oh, I've got to do this by myself and it can't be shared. Ask yourself that again honestly, and maybe when you're talking to a peer about it, maybe they might have a different perspective as to whether the workload could be shared in some way, where someone works to their skills and you work to your skills. And it's just that all of those are various forms of communication, and communicating with either yourself or someone else about the concerns that you've got and the skills that you do have. And again, I would reiterate that it's really important that self-care isn't a one-off thing. It's not a one-off thing that we do. Self-care can and should be a very daily act, and it can be as basic as telling yourself, this is something I'm really good at, I can do this is something that's achievable for me. And just speaking to yourself in that way can often be really helpful and more motivating for you and your day. So popping on to the you feel inadequate or incompetent bullet point earlier on there. Again, this follows on from the last bullet point. Spend time focusing on your successes and celebrate them with others. So don't just talk to yourself about the things that you're good at. Tell someone, oh, do you know what I did at work today? I did this and it felt brilliant. Or when I ran that group last night, this went really well. And focus on that for yourself and celebrate it, and do celebrate it with someone else. Again, the motivation that you will feel from that, and the feeling of ability and being able to do something will continue from you being positive about your actions and your skills and your abilities. And again, focusing on your strengths, work to the things that make you feel good. We all do better work when we feel good about the work that we're doing. And I know that isn't always possible. There's always work that we have to do that we don't enjoy, or maybe it isn't our entire strong point, but we can balance that out. And it's really important that we don't bog ourselves down with constantly doing work that we don't feel good about or that we don't feel good at. And so knowing your strengths and setting yourself up work that does work to those strengths that you've got will help reduce that excessive stress, that prolonged stress. And again, 2 more bullet points that were in the previous slide. Talk to a peer and ask for feedback. Those things will make a difference. It's no good trying to evaluate ourselves and just feeding back to ourselves, or just thinking, oh, if I said this to such and such a person, what would they say? Don't think it, do it. Talk to the person that you talk, or the people that you know that you can rely on for good constructive conversations around the feelings you have about the work that you deliver. I don't think I can stress enough in this hour how important I know it to be to talk to those around you when these feelings start to creep in. You're feeling underappreciated for your efforts. I don't know what other people feel about this, and it might be interesting to hear any of your thoughts afterwards in the Q&A session. But I do think that people feel awkward sometimes in wanting some sort of appreciation, or wanting that feedback that I've been mentioning, and asking for someone to say what they thought about the work that you've done. And that's okay. It's okay to want those things. It's okay sometimes to ask for those things as well. But I think it's important to try and think within ourselves, where are we looking for appreciation from? Who is it that we want that appreciation from? Is it something that is possible? Check your boundaries within that. Are you wanting appreciation from everyone that you are delivering some work to? Because that is slightly unrealistic. We can't always ever please everyone, and that can feel hard. But it's recognizing the remits and the reality of the work that we do. But once we can have assessed our boundaries and we know that actually I've got a manager who I would like to show me a bit more appreciation for the work that we do. I would like that, and that's not unreasonable. Or if you've got a colleague that you work with, it's not unreasonable to want them to show you some appreciation for either a piece of work that you've done or ongoing bits of work that you do. Um, but again, we're not always very good at giving feedback and appreciation. So can we ask for it? And I know it's like the least British thing to say is, can you tell me can you tell me I've just done something good, please? It's not something that we're always very good at doing. But we might not get it unless we do ask for it. And just know it's okay to want someone to say to you, thank you for doing that. That is okay and it is acceptable to want that. And it's I don't think it is good practice for those around us to not give good feedback to people that do good work. And so I guess this kind of goes both ways for me, is to accept that you want and need some appreciation and recognition for your work, but also are you giving it to others? And I'm sure many of you are, but I think it's always worth reassessing how much we recognise the work that others do as well, and how much we actually tell them that we recognise that work. So I think that goes both ways for me. Okay, so just moving on to this one. And so I talked a fair bit about this earlier in terms of those unreasonable demands that we either place on ourselves or place on others. So this isn't something that, and none of these things are things that I expect you to go, right, Rosie's told me what to do, I can go away and I can fix all my self-care issues and all my burnout issues because I've been told it. These are things that we have to implement on an ongoing basis. I don't expect that none of you don't know this already. I'm sure you do. I think sometimes we just need to think about it in different ways. But also it's not something we just do once. It's something that we really need to fit into our everyday lives, and something that we need to consistently work on in order to avoid the excessive and ongoing prolonged stress and to avoid that burnout. I'm not sure. I'm afraid I'm not sure what's happened to that bit of PowerPoint. I don't think it did that last time, but that first bullet point says, reassess your boundaries. Are they clear? Are they clear with yourselves, and are they clear with those around you? If it helps for people to make lists, I'm a huge fan of lists. Are you being clear about your time and your availability and your ability to do work? And are you keeping your boundaries? Are you working within set times? Are you not working within set times? Are you working in places that actually you really shouldn't be working in? If those boundaries blurred a little bit. And also recognising it's really important that we take a step back and go, is this a demand that I have placed on myself? Am I expecting too much of myself? Or is this coming from somewhere else? If we've taken that step back and we've taken all that into consideration, and we really think that some other people or somebody else has put these demands on us and they don't feel attainable, then talk to someone, because if it feels unattainable and you're going to burn out, that work isn't going to get done. So there is no harm in saying to someone, I'm really worried, I don't think I can do this work. This feels like too much. I'm worried that I will not achieve this. Because if we talk to someone and talk through that, there's no harm going to be done there, because actually the best case scenario is that someone knows that you're struggling, and so we can try and reduce some of those demands or some of those targets that are being put on you. But it's really important that you do talk to someone about those feelings of being overwhelmed, because again, if you carry that with yourself and think, oh gosh, I should be able to deal with this, then nothing will change. and you will continue to feel stress, which will lead to burnout, which will then lead to work not being done, that possibly could have been avoided if we were able to talk about it. I did tell you I would talk about communication and talking to people a lot through this session. I wasn't lying. Can you write down what you think is achievable, and be really honest with yourself? Give yourself a time schedule for your days. What do your days look like? How long does it take you to do pieces of work? Give yourself a clear schedule and really honestly look at what you think is achievable in the time that you've got, and add time for breaks within that. So whether it's a daily thing or whether it's over a quarter, whether it's over a 6-month period, if you've got something you want to achieve in 6 months, schedule it, plan it out for 6 months, and look at what you can do either on a week by week or month by month basis, and break it down into smaller chunks. Say, rather than say in 6 months this is what this whole huge big project's going to look like, break it down and say in 3 weeks time we'll have done this, this and this, and we'll go back and we'll reassess where we're at. So constantly on your journey, reassess where it is that you are at, and plan it ahead. Planning ahead is so massively important, and we can't always mitigate for anything that might happen, and things that might crop up that we can't always help, but we can, if we are giving ourselves time for breaks and time for personal life, we will be, and keeping those boundaries, we will be more able to deal with things that may come up that we might not have expected. I'm a huge fan of making plans, and I know not everyone is, and it doesn't tick everyone's boxes, but it does tick boxes in terms of avoiding burnout, because you're not putting something off because you're scared it's such a big piece of work. You've broken it down and you've planned it in smaller, more achievable chunks. And that can help for the demands that others put on you, but also the demands that you are putting on yourself as well. And last but not least, to no one's surprise, I'm sure, is speak to someone about it, no matter whether it's your demands or someone else's demands. Speak to whoever that might be, and say, this is how I'm feeling with my work. And sometimes it might be as simple as a problem shared is a problem halved, and that might be, that might be the minimum that you get. But if that's the minimum that you get, then it's still worth doing, because often you can get a little bit more than that and get a bit more of a forward plan coming together. Okay, so in terms of that's a bunch of sort of the negative stuff, I guess, that we always tend to be very good at focusing on the things that are difficult and the things that are hard, and how we feel when things get hard, when things get difficult, and when we focus on that so much, it can feel really difficult to remember what it feels like when we feel energized and we feel motivated. And I'm a big fan of going, like I've said, of celebrating our successes and celebrating the things that we're good at, because they do continue our motivation. So it's really important, I think, for us all to take a step back and go, oh gosh, wow, I actually feel like I've got quite a lot of energy. I'm feeling really good right now. And I think, I don't know, it might not be true to all of you listening now, but if any of us do keep some form of a diary, or we write things down, or we talk to people about our feelings, it's often when it gets to the point where things have got quite negative and things are quite hard, and so we'll write down, this feels really difficult, I'm really tired, not sure how I'm going to get past this feeling of exhaustion. And actually, we're not very good at recording the times when we feel great. And so this is something for you to all take away with you, but I would challenge you all to, if you keep some form of a diary, if you do write things down, if you do talk to people about things, do it when you feel energetic and when you feel motivated. Do it when you feel great, so that you can read back and you can reflect and you can look back at, oh gosh, look, I was feeling really great at that time. What were the ingredients that meant that I was feeling so good about that piece of work? And that just reading that again can often help us get back into that zone. And also within that, recognizing what your easiest go-to form of self-care is. I was when I was looking at I was researching this and I was looking at all these different posts and articles about self-care tips from the busiest people in the world. And these busiest people in the world were clearly also the richest people in the world that had jobs where they could take a 6-week vacation and go skiing for that length of time, and that was their self-care, which is so unachievable and unattainable for those of us working in the kind of sector and jobs that we are working in. And I really don't like this version that self-care has to be something extravagant and it has to be something big, because also that means you're working until you're burnt out, and then you do some self-care, you look after yourself, and you go back and do it all again. And actually, as I mentioned earlier about the way that we talk to ourselves in a positive way on an ongoing basis, that can be a form of self-care for a lot of people, is the positive voice in our head overriding the negative voice in our head. So can you give yourself a little list? Can you give yourself, I don't know if you've got a chalkboard or some fridge magnets or a diary or whatever it looks like, some post-it notes by your computer, of the things that make you feel good, that are really accessible, easy and achievable. And that can, it can be from cooking yourself a nice meal to having a friend round for a nice bit of food, or to letting yourself finish the chapter of the book that you want to read, or walking the dog in the daylight, which is something that's hard to do in the winter, I appreciate. But what are the things that we can do that are actually much easier and much more achievable than waiting for us to burn out and then doing something big and extravagant? Little and often is always, or usually, best, and in this situation, the little and often will help to prevent that burnout. Just make sure that I've gone through everything on that slide that I wanted to. Yeah. So we've mentioned this already, but here's just a bit of a bullet point slide for you to take away to remind yourself about what planning ahead and communicating can look like. So create your own clear and reasonable expectations of yourself and of others around you as well, and stick to them. If we write them down, and if we can create what we think is acceptable, if that is, I am not going to answer emails after 8 p.m. on an evening, or before 7 a.m. on a morning, or before 9 a.m. on a morning. Just, things like that, little things. Again, it doesn't have to be big. It can be the period of time that we give ourselves to have our lunch, and to take a lunch break during our working day, something that I'm sure many of us forget to do. And I think use forget in the loosest of terms. And actually, I'm sure we're all eating lunch as we work in various situations. And so something around keeping a clear, at least 3 days a week, I will take half an hour away from my desk at lunchtime and have some lunch. It can be, it can be things like that, being reasonable with ourselves. Where possible, and I know this isn't always possible for everyone, depending on the work that we do, and again, whether that's as a voluntary community leader or whether it's a solo project that we're working on. But where possible, work as a team. Again, it goes back to that working to your strengths, and not being a solo act. You can't be everything to everyone, and you can't, I mean, maybe some people can. I can't. I've not got all of the skills to do everything that is needed for successful, sustainable work. So where we can, let's work as a team and share the load with other people, and don't take on more than you should do. And I don't know if that rings true for people, but I've definitely been in meetings where it kind of seems like actions are going towards one person who's like, yeah, no, I can do that. Yeah, no, I know that person. I can talk to that person. Oh, I've got an email with them, so I'll send them an email. Can we share that load? Can we share that load as a team and recognise in ourselves and go, oh, actually, I've already got quite a lot of action points here, so I'm not going to do that. But also, can we look out for each other within that as well? I know that fits in with this one in terms of ending a working day. I don't know how many of us will end up working from home, and that might mean that we don't particularly have an end time to our working day, because we kind of work throughout the day on and off, and we might not finish until 7:30, 8:30, 9:30? Can we support each other and support ourselves to actually end a working day and not just go, oh, I'll just send this one more email? Sometimes we all need that push just to get out of the office, because we've been in the office so long that whatever we do won't be as good as if we come back tomorrow or next week and do it with a bit of a fresh head. This is this is a big one. I work for a local sexual health charity. I'm really good friends with all of my colleagues that I work with, and we do lots of things. We might go for a coffee together during our working day, or we might sit and have lunch together, but inevitably we might always end up talking about work. It is a big commonality that we've got. It's things that we care about and are passionate about, and that's beautiful, and there's a great time for us to talk about the work that we're passionate about. But does that mean that we're not getting any time off when we're socialising with our peers or co-facilitators or colleagues? So can we be a bit stricter when we are socialising with those people outside of work or outside of those working boundaries that we have, where we go, yeah, let's hang out and let's talk about the latest Star Wars film, or whatever it is. Talk about something that isn't work. Remind yourself that you're human and you've got other interests, and talk about those other interests with other people. I think that's really important. And I'm going to go on now to talk a little bit about peer supervision or group supervision or supervision from managers or from your colleagues, however that might look like. There's lots of different kind of ways that supervision looks, and I don't know how many of you have access to someone that you can have supervision with, but I guess it's important for me to say at this point that this doesn't just have to be for those who are working in salaried jobs with a manager. If you have some peers that might not work in the same organisation or charity or role as you, but have a similar level of responsibilities, peer supervision can still be a really great way of sharing that load. Even if you're not sharing the work, you're talking about the load and just having other perspectives on the work that we do. So the aims of supervision in its many different guises do include that offloading, just being able to say to someone, this is really hard work, or you might not have even realised how much work you were taking on and how much work you were actually doing. And so when sat down to say, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I've been doing over the last 6 weeks, all of a sudden you hear yourself how much you are talking and how much you've listed and how big that seems. So just offloading that can be a really great space to recognise your burnout potentially. It also feeds into that feeling of being heard, which can feed into that feeling of being appreciated and feeling valued for the work that you do. And just having a space where you talk to someone and someone listens to you, and hears what you've got to say, rather than, if we're talking to our mates, that can be a good thing, and it can be a good thing to say, oh, my day was really stressful, this and this happened. But then often our mate will go, oh yeah, I get what you mean, something like this happened to me. And I'm not saying that's not valuable, it has got a value to it, but feeling heard from someone who just goes, gosh, that sounds like a lot, that sounds like you've taken on a lot, that sounds really stressful or really scary, well done you for doing that, or how do you feel about continuing this, or what do you need to support you with that. It's a different response in supervision. Supervision has a different response than the friendship conversations that we have. And supervision should also act as a planning tool, so that you've got somebody else sat with you, helping you plan ahead and plan what it is that you've got coming. So again, it's very important to distinguish the difference between a conversation with a friend and supervision for the purpose of supervision, and having someone else guide you through what you're saying in a slightly different way than a friend might. And I have external supervision at work, and I'm really fortunate to be able to access external supervision. But one of the things that we have at Yorkshire Mesmac, and again, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are, but one of the things that we implement is that people who have this a similar role across the organisation, we come together once every 2 months just to talk about stuff that's going on for us. It's really important to recognise that we can't fix the problems, we can't make the problems go away, you can't make your work go away or make your report deadlines go away. That can't be changed, but having that space to offload, feel heard and be able to plan ahead will make things feel more achievable and often less daunting and less scary. And that's something that that we really find really useful at MESMAC, is for all of us in a coordinator role to just share the work that's been going on for the last couple of months, and for each of us to say, oh, actually, this has happened before in this organisation, here's what you can do, or here's what's been useful before, why don't you try this? And just having a different perspective on something sometimes does solve all of your problems. Not always. I'm absolutely not saying supervision will fix everything, but the people that I know that get supervision, I know find it extremely useful. And if we can go away and implement supervision in our life in some way or other, I think you would all benefit massively from that. For you to be able to go ahead and give that a bit of a go, there's just 5 bullet points here that we find useful to go through in a supervision session. So if you're here as a community leader from a local community group, I'm not sure, but if you've got a couple of leaders, can you put an hour or 2 hours aside every 6 weeks or 8 weeks to just run through these questions together? And start off, very important to start off with what is going well, and start off with that, celebrating your successes. Moving on to what isn't going so well and what can be improved on. And I think again it's important to use that language of what can be improved on, to say we're not just going to say, oh, this is rubbish, this isn't going well, I'm disappointed with this. It's to say, this isn't going as well as I'd hoped it to, but I'd like to talk about what we can do to improve that, and putting that time there to say, what do you think we could do? Shall we bash out a few ideas about how we think we can improve this? And that might look like a variety of different things, but it's putting that time aside to discuss it. The service delivery or job specific issues might be more specific to those people maybe in an office space, about your working hours or the locations that you're working. But if you're delivering groups, can you talk about the issues that you've got getting to a certain place for a certain time? Is that something that is making you feel really stressed because the buses are really rubbish in that area, so you would like if you could start half an hour later? Sometimes those things can be discussed and actually are able to be changed once we've discussed it. And then moving on to giving space and time to talk about any relationships that you've got with colleagues or service users or peers, and how that's feeling. What relationships are really thriving, what relationships are working really well and you're really excited about, and what relationships are a little bit tense or aren't working so well. Is there a dynamic between colleagues that is a bit difficult? Having space to say that and to talk about it, rather than just trying to put up with something that you're finding really difficult. If we're trying to put up with it, we're working ourselves to something that's an unreasonable demand. So can we give ourselves space to say, I find it really hard working with this person. Can I talk to you about that and what that looks like and how we might deal with that? And so giving you space to talk about those relationships. And then of course, anything else, any other business. So again, I would challenge you, give you the homework, whatever kind of language you might want to use there, to take that tool, take it away. And if you're not already using or getting or giving some form of supervision, go and try it, give it a go, see if it helps, see what happens after an hour and a half, 2 hours of going through this kind of format with colleagues or managers. So that's supervision. I'm just going to go on to the little bit of stuff around self-care. So take some time out. Now, I don't mean go on a skiing holiday for 6 weeks. What I mean is take a day where you don't work, or take an afternoon where you don't work. Get yourself outside. Do you like gardening? Is being outside something that nourishes you? It doesn't have to be about exercise, and by no means saying that we should all get out and exercise and it'll make us all feel better. That's not what I'm here to say. Just if it is something that you enjoy, then do take the time to do the things that you enjoy. And if it's not that, is it being creative? Is it knitting something, or stitching something, or reading, or drawing? Is it doing one of those colouring books? I know I've got one of those meditation colouring books at the minute, and I never thought I'd like it, and I actually really do, and it's really nice to sit with that at the end of the day. And it might be something as little as half an hour at the end of the day, switching off from your phone, turning your phone off, turning your laptop off, and doing something that nourishes you, that takes your time away from thinking about the things that are stressing you out. Because if you're always thinking about the things that are stressing you out, it's not going to make it go away. And taking time out won't make it go away, but it will nourish your brain in a way that might mean that you're more able to deal with the issues that you've got, that are facing you. And I find it really important that we set the limits on our working hours. Some weeks we might work way more hours than we would expect of anyone else and expect of ourselves. And that's sometimes the nature of the beast of the work that we do, and we can't always say every day will be an 8-hour day, 5 days a week, and that's it. And I'm not saying that because I know that's unreasonable, mostly because this week for me hasn't been a regular working week and has been extended hours. But it's about setting the limits on over a longer term on your working hours. It is not sustainable to work 10-hour days, 6 days a week, over a long period of time. If we remember, we go right back to the beginning of the session. It said about prolonged stresses. We can't sustain that kind of behaviour. So setting the limits on our working hours in a more general way, and say, well, actually, I did work 10 hours yesterday, so I can be a bit kinder to myself, and take Saturday morning for a lie-in with a cup of tea and a biscuit in bed. Whatever that is, we need to set those limits, and be kind to ourselves, but also be a little bit harsh with ourselves, and turn our phone off, and tell ourselves to stop working. And I've kind of got this thing in a minute. I don't want to say to people, treat yourself, or that you deserve something, because that doesn't work. I don't quite like the language of, oh, I deserve this, or I'm going to treat myself to this, because it sounds like it's a one-off thing. And again, one-off self-care acts aren't sustainable for prolonged, healthy mental health. So be kind to yourself, celebrate those small successes, focus on your accomplishments, make space in your home, for those of you that do work at home, that is safe from work and is work free. Have you got a spare bedroom? Is it your bedroom? Is it the kitchen? Is it the living room? Can you contain the work that you do to one area of your house, and have other areas that you go into and you know that work won't enter those? Be kind to yourself and allow that to happen. Schedule that downtime on a regular basis. And actually schedule it. Don't wait for it to be a spontaneous invite for a coffee. Actually say, no, at this time, on this day, I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to do the things that nourish me. I'm going to fill my pot with lovely things that I enjoy, things that make me feel great. And again, that's recognizing what they are, and make time for them. Be kind to yourself with that. Again, ask for help and talk to others. I put those there as a little bit of a joke, because I've put them through the whole way through this presentation. But that is also being kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself and allow yourself some help. Allow yourself that conversation with someone to say, I'm struggling a little bit here. I'd like to talk to someone. Or ask for help to say, I really enjoy going for a muddy walk, but I don't know how I can get there. Does anyone that I know live somewhere or go somewhere that I can have a really muddy walk with? ask for that kind of help. It doesn't have to be help around the work that's making you feel burnt out. It can be help to self-care, and it can be help to say, I really want to try something creative and therapeutic, but I don't know how to go about that. Does anyone go to a book club, or does anyone have a knitting club? And asking for that kind of help, and asking for support to do those nice things that feel like you're being kind to yourself without feeling like you should deserve it, just because we should be being kind to ourselves as we are being kind to others. Which just leaves me with to say to yourself about the things that you are doing in terms of your self-care. It doesn't have to be the self-care that is prescribed on the internet by everyone else. Does it spark joy? Do the things that you are doing, do they spark joy in your life? Whether that's work, whether that's self-care, whether that's the people you surround yourself with, whatever it is your life, and are the things you are doing in it sparking joy? And if there's not enough joy being sparked, then rather than Marie Kondo it and throw things out of your life, add things into your life that are sparking joy. And I think that's where I'm going to leave that today, for you to go away and write those lists and think about those conversations that you're going to have with people around your health, your self-care, your mental health, and avoiding that burnout. So thank you very much. There's a few minutes left for questions and answered. I'm very thrilled that I've managed to get through that in exactly the right amount of time again. So over to anyone if you've got any questions.